You're on mute, Dave.
I'm on mute. Welcome to SafeDefend Live, where we talk about your kids, your schools, and how to keep them safe. And I was on mute again. That's 2 weeks in a row, Phil.
Well, the funniest part is I just said, write a note to remind yourself that you're on mute. And you said, no, I'm not going to do it. Oh, you even wrote the note. Okay. Are you on mute again, Dave?
I am on mute, but I'm off now because I'm talking.
Let's just leave it. Let's just leave it on. I think for everybody that's listening, when we were talking on the other end, we could hear ourselves when we talk, but I don't think everybody else is hearing it. So let's just go with that. If somebody is watching and they want to fire a comment, if you're hearing an echo, let us know. But this way we don't have to worry about Colonel Dave forgetting he's on mute because he's got a lot of good things to say.
Well, then you'll just see me move my lips. So we got Doug Parisi with us again. He is the security training expert at SafeDefend. He knows everything about school safety, and he's our guy. So, Doug, what are we going to talk about today?
No pressure, Doug.
Yeah, no pressure. One of the things is what we really ought to talk about is, not everybody is involved in schools. And so some of the stuff that potentially could talk about was that we would talk about what OSHA and this general duty to warn clause, which was something that came out in 1971. And it pretty much what it says is that it requires employers to address recognizable threats and to make sure that they're preventing these type of things from happening in the workplace. And what's happened is it's a very short OSHA general duty to warn clause statement, but it keeps getting reinterpreted over the years. And the biggest thing that employers have to understand is that they do have a duty to notify their employees of a hazard that might happen in the workplace. Now, sometimes that warning can just be via email, which is something that happened if we think of the Virginia Beach municipal building shooting, where the employee unfortunately was disgruntled and took his actions out on his fellow employees. But they sent that on an email, and it came out 19 minutes after the incident started. And so that's the type of thing that's not timely, and those are the type of things we look at. We have had some fines that have been levied against universities for not being timely in their type of incidents. And so that's the type of thing that has to be considered when you're looking at your priorities of security. Yes, you might have armed security, you might have access control systems, you might have surveillance cameras. But if you are passing up on notification, you are opening yourself up to a liability.
Well, now, one thing too, Doug, I just had lunch with the superintendent of schools this week. And I was asking him, and does that apply to schools? Does the OSHA requirement to report apply to schools or no?
It does require. It is considered workplace, and then they could come in. It is generally something that, because of PA systems, schools have sort of procedures in place. Where the liability comes in is several areas. One is most of their employees are going to be covered under some sort of workman's comp thing. This is something you probably have to check with your school district's legal department. But generally, where workman's comp is going to cover any of those sort of injuries, and so it's going to protect the school district. Where they're detrimental, or where they need to be. Where it's detrimental, or where they need to be aware of it, is if there's any third-party person there, school volunteers, paras, people that aren't employees of the school district. If they're not part of that notification system, the school district itself would be liable for anything that happened to those people.
Right. Sorry about that. My beautiful. I'm calling in from home. My beautiful wife works from home, and I'm sure I'm in trouble. I didn't tell her I was doing a call right now, so. I'll if you don't hear from me an hour after this, Dave, send help.
I will. I got it there. So the interesting thing about what Doug's talking about is I think that there's a misperception at the school level, at the business level. I think most business owners and schools are not aware of this law. I would be willing to bet a dollar to anybody here on the call that thinks it's different. The question is, how do we help get the word out to people, let them know, hey, this is a problem you need to address. There are solutions out there. Do you have procedures in place? What do you do? And how do you get people to really focus on this? Because I've got a son in college, right? And the PA system at OU, if somebody starts shooting in the student union, isn't going to work.
Right.
I mean, this is brutally honest. It's not going to work. So this is really scary for me as a parent with a son away in college.
Well, Doug, let me ask you a question real quick. Dave brings, and I've never asked you this, and I don't know why, but do universities, I mean, are they looking at systems like SafeDefend?
Yeah, they are looking at them. The biggest issue that they have is that it's almost like a checkbox for them, and they're just like, hey, we just need to do a notification system. And so what they do is they'll go out there and they'll buy some sort of notification system and say we're good at it, or we're good, and therefore we're covered. And I'll just, Dave, you just mentioned it. I have a daughter that's a junior here in Kansas, and I made sure that she, does certain things. One is when she goes into to any new building, I say the first thing you need to do is show up about 10 minutes early, look for alternate escape routes, make sure that you know which of the exits are, and that you walk through those exits and know where to go once you're even outside, because some of those might just put you out onto some balcony or a courtyard that you're trapped within. And so I said, I want you to have that plan. So the kids need to become adults in that regard. But the second thing that I did, which was probably actually was for the first thing, the second was making sure she was aware of her surroundings. But the first thing I said is find out what your school's notification system is and opt into that, and make sure that you are on those alerts, and that if something does happen, that you are one of those people that's going to be, hey, we need to head west because something's going on to those two buildings to the east of us. And that's the type of stuff that my daughter did. What's funny is that I've actually asked her to say, hey, talk to any of your friends, these people you meet, and ask them if they know about this. And to a person, I would tell you maybe 5% of the people she's talked to, because I've had her ask this to hundreds of people in classes, 5% of the students at schools actually opt into these sort of notification systems. So it frustrates me that schools are so passive, meaning, hey, we put it out there. We'll just let the students take care of it because we notified them on the very first day during orientation. Not that they had anything else on their mind at that time, but hey, you might want to opt into this app we have.
Yeah, and I don't want to put colleges and universities on blast, but I'm going to. I mean, it bothers me that one of the things that they're CYAing by sending out an email, but what about actually making the campuses more secure, more safe? Why would we want to do that? I mean, there's a high school in the state of Oklahoma that just spent $35 million to upgrade their football facility. Okay, now that's great. I got no problem with that. I think that's wonderful. But why wouldn't, I guess I'm asking you as a person that talks about this, does it come down to money a lot of times?
Well, it definitely comes down to money, but I also think it comes down to a priority. And it also is that sort of not in my backyard mentality, like it's not going to happen here. And that's what's so crazy is when you look at things that happen like in Umpqua, Oregon, when the shooting happened there, the schools didn't have the proper door locks that students would be able to just run over and push a button and get that door locked so that they could barricade in there. Instead, they were left literally trying to pile up enough stuff in front of the door that the door wouldn't be open, because the school found it easier to just have a custodian walk around in the morning and unlock all the classroom doors and then do the same thing that evening, if they lock them at all. We've all been in universities where just classrooms are open because there's nothing in there. And so this is the type of thing where it's like, nope, you need a push button so that the students on the inside can actually secure that door. That's the number one thing you can do in an active shooter situation, is to get on the other side of a locked door, because it's very difficult to breach these doors.
As you've said in the past, nobody's ever breached through a door into a classroom in an active shooter. One person came through a window, right? But
that's correct.
But to me, again, I mean, I feel like I'm putting everybody on blast, but how hard is it to put an effective lock on a door?
Well, it's really not. The schools just need to upgrade their door systems, make sure that they have proper locking doors, but it's just not a priority. They just don't see it as something that they need to do, is to say, hey, let's go around and get some locksmith to come in and just replace all the doors. And you don't need to have, these crazy keys that, like they pay for these universal key systems and stuff like that. And like, oh, we lost one, now we have to rekey all the doors. That's not what we're talking about here. We're just talking about the ability to push a button on the inside so that it prevents any from the outside getting in. That's all we want them to have.
Literally.
That's it.
Okay. Sorry about that. And now we also talk about, you talked about OSHA, and of course, most people when they hear OSHA, they think private business, right? They think people out there. I know SafeDefend has clients in the private sector. Talk a little bit about, the scenarios there. There's one, I think it's very easy for everybody can figure out, well, we have children. We want to protect our children. Well, we want to protect everybody. I mean, unfortunately, Dave and I live in a state where the term going postal was originated because of
right there.
Yeah, about a mile from our office, and tragic and horrible. And but why? talk about private sector and the why and the need and those types of things.
So the biggest thing is that you're opening yourself up to liability when you don't put certain things in place. And the biggest thing I would say is what was called the administrative controls. And that is, what do your policies say about weapons, workplace violence, harassment, and things like that? The second thing is what are you doing to enforce those and making sure that they are being applied equally across the entire employment staff? Whether or not you're talking 8 employees or whether or not you're talking 2,000 employees, you have an obligation to have administrative controls that say, these are our policies, this is allowed and this isn't allowed. And then the second thing that we look at is what physically are you putting in place in order to protect the building itself? If you just have it open to the public and people are coming and going, then you are opening yourselves up to some level of liability if it was foreseeable. And so you say, if people are just walking in off the street all the time asking to use the restroom, it's foreseeable that some crime could happen related to that. And so then therefore the employer has an obligation to protect the employees from that. And those are the type of things that we look at. And then the other thing we look at is what's called mechanical controls. And mechanical controls are the things like the cameras, the access controls, like notification systems similar to SafeDefend that will alert people in place. None of us scoff at the fact that if you put in a tornado or sort of, let's just say, weather-related alarms in buildings, chemical releases, if those are on, we have chemical alarms for buildings that have for companies that have chemicals on site, and we have things for fire controls. We recognize all of these things happen and they're there, but for some reason we sit there and say, yeah, but I don't need it for violence. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the Bureau of Labor Statistics tells us that you are 30 times more likely to have somebody show up at your building with a weapon intent on harming somebody at that building than you are to have a fire. And you are 60 times more likely to have an armed intruder than you are to have a tornado. And yet we spend more time making sure that the building is fireproof and that we have secure facilities for tornadoes, even though those are less likely incidents.
Well, I'm gonna agree with you on that. Edmond Public Schools spent millions of dollars building tornado shelters in schools. Very thankful for that. We have tornadoes in Oklahoma. I appreciate that. But I don't think any school district around here is taking proactive actions today to have mechanical blocks and immediate alarm systems to protect and secure our children. I would be hard pressed to say I don't know of one active shooter training drill that's happened during my children's time in the secondary school system. Not one. I don't recall one happening or being told about it. Now, I may not have heard about it. That's fine, but I do not recall any of it. So, I see a real challenge for schools that I think parents are unaware of, right? The threat is much higher than a tornado. We don't have known procedures for children in place if something happens, and we have no mechanical blocks, like you said. So we have zero protection, really, other than the SROs if they're in the school or near the incident when it happens. And thank God for the SROs for being there. I mean, it's a deterrent, right?
Right.
But it doesn't deter everybody.
Well, and the good thing about SROs is, again, is our system. We see SafeDefend as a way to assist the SRO to go engage that bad person, in the safest and most effective manner. I mean, with SafeDefend system, Doug, I mean, when you push it, you're going to know, hey, hallway 3, whatever, classroom 208's where it triggered. They don't have to spend time sweeping and clearing and trying to safely navigate the school. They can go where the threat was last seen and give you great ground intelligence.
Right. And all of that is what we're telling employers and schools that they need to do, is that they need to improve their notification system. That should be a priority, because the number one thing I can do for you as a civilian is to alert you that you're under threat. By the way, Phil, I've paid your kids each $20 that when you walk outside today, they're going to bombard you with water balloons, right? If I tell you that in advance, then the moment you walk out, your head's going to be up. You're going to be looking for those kids, and you're probably going to have your super soaker ready to retaliate. Well, what we're trying to say is that if I'm in a school and I'm sitting in class and I have no idea what's going on, I'm vulnerable. But if somebody tells me there's a threat in that building, I can get my door locked. I can get those kids into the safer corner. I can get the light shut out. I can start preparing myself to protect the threshold of that door. That's why notification is so important. And Dave, to your point, real quick on Moore, Oklahoma was a tragedy, but we've only had 19 fatalities from weather-related incidents in the last 50 years in the United States from some climactic events. but we have spent millions and millions of dollars preventing that. We've only had 5 schools since 1990 that a tornado has hit the building when students are in the classroom. And I would tell you this, is that we actually know when tornadoes are coming. The weatherman tells us 3 days ahead of time. That morning they're saying, hey, it doesn't look good. And then we have weather spotters that get out there and tornado alarms and all that sort of stuff. If I were to tell you, hey, Phil, it doesn't look good, there might be a school shooting at your kid's high school next week, you'd be like, I'm not sending my kids to school at all. And yet somehow when we're like, oh, there might be a tornado, we're just like, oh, go off. But the other thing, too, is we know that the highest propensity for tornadoes is between 4 and 8 p.m. And we also know that it occurs between May 20th and May 22nd as the most frequent day. So all of that stuff gives us information, and yet we still freak out over this sort of stuff. And what I'm saying is it's all about building your buildings better or constructing your buildings better. The Moore, Oklahoma tragedy was because of poor construction in the sense of they didn't build the building with that anticipation in mind.
Yeah, and I think I really appreciate your example you gave about, with the weather, because all my kiddos are grown now. They're all adults and doing adulting things. So I look smarter now than I used to because they're getting to live through all that. But you're right. I mean, and we've had stuff in our local school where some kid would write something stupid on a wall. I'm going to bring a gun Thursday and kill everybody. What do? Most times they shut the school down, or you will hear parents on social media saying, hey, there was a threat. No way I'm sending my kid to school on Thursday. Now, luckily, most times it's just a kid being a dumb kid most times. Right. But we don't know that. But I think your point is so powerful. The other thing I would say is, we've talked about this in the past is fire drills. And it's been since what year since there was a fatality from a fire in a school building?
1958.
So since 1958, thank God we've had no fatalities due to fire. Well, what do though? We drill those things probably monthly at least. And thank God we do. I'm not saying we shouldn't. We should be doing that. What I'm simply saying is we got to take the right steps, the right actions to ensure our kids are safe from all things. Not just fire we haven't had a fatality since 58, not just from storms where unfortunately we've lost 19 beautiful lives, in schools due to that. I mean, those are all tragic, but think about all the lives we would have lost if we hadn't done a lot of preparation or if we didn't have advance notice, right? So advance notice is the key, and making sure that we give ourselves the best chance possible to have a positive outcome should be the goal.
Right.
True?
And that's the key. What you just said there is when we have a threat of violence at the schools, parents keep their kids home and schools shut down because we don't have confidence that we can navigate that situation. We don't mind sending our kids to school if we know tornadoes are possible because we know the school's prepared for it, they've drilled for it, and they've constructed for it. And the same thing applies with fire. When people don't understand, but about a third of the cost of a new school goes directly towards all the fire code. If you've ever seen if you drill a hole from one classroom to another to run a cable through it, you've got to then put fire caulking in that hole to fill that up. And so we just have this huge expense when it comes to the glue underneath the tiles or the carpets, what the books are made of, what the desks are made of, what the walls are, the sprinkler systems, all of that sort of stuff. There's a massive cost that goes into these buildings to make sure that they're fireproof. And that has saved lots of lives. And what we need to do is say, okay, let's take some of the energy we put into making our buildings fireproof and to say, hey, how do we make them hostile intruder proof? And what I'm telling you is it's exactly what we just talked about at the university level. Good doors and locks are the number one things you can do to make a classroom secure, right? That's something that is very simple, very easy to do. And then training for it so that the teachers know what to do, and then telling the parents, hey, we train, once or twice a semester. Our kids are prepared. Our teachers are prepared. If anything happens in that school, one of our teachers, we have the SafeDefend system. They can put their finger down, gets notified, classroom's on lockdown, and those parents will now all of a sudden realize that school's prepared to handle a situation like that should it ever come. Even though it is, and by the way, I love to say this, is that we train for the possibility, not the probability, because the probability that anything like this ever happens in a school is so infinitesimally small But when you realize it's possible, and if you're not prepared, the damage can be so severe. And so when we look at these incidents happening at about 20 to 25 schools a year, knowing that we have 144,000 schools in the United States, we sit there and say, boy, the probability that anything like this happens is so infinitesimally small. Maybe I don't really need to spend that much time on it. What you need to do is prepare for the possibility, because fire has shown us training for the possibility is what's going to save lives.
Well,
So-
and let me give an example, Dave. You know, unfortunately, last week in the little town I live in, it's a town of about 11,000 people. There was tragically a murder involving a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old with a firearm. We're lucky it didn't happen in school. I mean, so it doesn't matter where you live, because I think growing up in a small town in southeastern Kansas, we never thought about this stuff. Now, this was also 40 years ago, right? We didn't think about these kind of things. Everybody had guns in their gun racks, and they were going dove hunting after school, or they'd come straight from dove hunting for school, or whatever, you know. But also, nobody locked their vehicles, and there's just a lot of differences. But I think you get lulled to sleep thinking if you live in a small town, or if you do this, you do that you're not going to have to deal potentially with these kind of horrible situations, and that's just not true.
Right. Nope. West Liberty Salem was a single building, 419 student K through 12 school district that had a school shooting. You know,
yeah.
Parkland was the 6th largest school district in the country. This happens in small towns to big towns. It is all based on perceptions and all that. We saw the story, unfortunately, last week where these two students murdered I believe the Spanish teacher up in Iowa.
Yep.
And this is just this is unfortunately what is going on in our country. What's interesting is people say, "Well, it is getting worse." Don't get me wrong, but this stuff has been going on for more than 100 years. And when you look at it and say, was that real? And the answer is yes. This has happened in the United States for a very long time. It is just getting exponentially worse. The other thing that you have to look at, and it's just like type of thing. Everybody always thinks, well, when a person with a gun, don't think it's just going to be a gun. Sometimes it's going to be a machete. Sometimes it's going to be somebody with acid that's already in the school. We've had some horrific attacks where people have gone around and just decided they've broken for whatever reason mentally, and they've just decided to hurt other people. And you need to be able to get your entire building on lockdown within seconds to avoid mass casualty incidents.
Doug, one thing too, I think, I think next week we're going to have a guest on the show that is actually had an incident that uses SafeDefend, that's had an incident in their facility. It'll be great to hear from them, what their experience was, but it still comes down to me. Yesterday, I'm in a meeting. Okay. You guys are going to kick out of this. We're talking about it. And this gentleman says, "Oh, my wife's a school teacher." And I said, "Where?" And he told me, and I said, "You know what? I have another client. I think they have their system in their school." He said, "What's the name?" I told him. He texted it to his wife, said, "Do you guys have this?" He immediately gets back a picture of the box in her classroom. Said, "Yes, this gives me all kinds of peace of mind. It's a great," it just goes on and on and on. Now, this is a classroom teacher. Okay. So that's the why. I left there as the husband of an educator, of a career educator. I worry about, luckily my wife now teaches virtually. And I say luckily because it gives me a peace of mind. I don't worry about her going to a building. I don't worry about her going to a soft target. I don't worry about it because she's here. And as Dave will attest to, we're not a soft target at our house, but having that kind of feedback, the peace of mind it gives the professionals that are just simply trying to do their job, that are just simply trying to take care of their responsibilities, do the job, and teach the youth of our country. To get that kind of feedback from her was amazing. And then the husband says, "Oh yeah," because then somebody in the room said, "Well, what's in that safe?" Everybody calls it and say, "What's in that safe?" And then it led to, "Well, here's the stuff, and this is what's all in it," all coming from the teacher. So it was really cool to hear that, first of all, that a teacher knew the system, loves the system, knows what's in the system, knows what the use of all the tools in the system are for, and how it's going to help her protect herself and her children. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, in all of that, one of the things that's so interesting is that all she has to do is put her finger down on that, and she's done her due diligence to alert law enforcement, notify everybody else in the building, and now all she has to do is protect her kids, which is what the tools in the box are for. And that's where schools need to look at their systems and say, wait a second, are we really meeting the standard? At Parkland, they're like, well, we had a PA system and we trained everybody to use it. But in order to use a PA system, you had to push a button that was right next to the door, and you had to expose yourself through the door, the window in the door, the whole time while you're sitting there trying to tell someone, waiting for the secretary in the front office to then do that. And then, by the way, there was no speakers in the hallways, so the students that were in the hallways wouldn't have heard that they were supposed to get into a classroom. And so that if you're expecting a PA system like that to work, you've already failed. When apps, everybody says these apps are great, and I think on some level they could potentially work, but they're more theoretical because they've never really worked in practice. One, only about 10% of the people actually download the app. Two, they don't even know where it is on their phone, because all of us have been in that situation where we can't find the app. But three, it requires fine motor skills and critical thinking in order to sit there, navigate an app, try and figure out where it is, and then type in the information that's necessary. What we need people to be able to do is, just like a fire alarm, pull the fire alarm and be done. SafeDefend works that way. We use fingerprints so that in a school, kids can touch it, nothing happens. But if a teacher that's registered goes and touches their finger, bam, the entire system goes off. And I would tell you this is the exact same thing for businesses. The example I'll give you is Kraft Foods. Some employees got in a fight. One of them got kicked off campus, had their badge taken away. Well, they just returned with a gun and went up to the security booth, and they pointed the gun and said, "Give me your card." They used that card to get into the building, and the security officer called the front office of an entire manufacturing plant and said, "Hey, somebody just stole my badge." They had no way of notifying the employees within the building that there was a threat, and unfortunately, several people lost their lives because there was no alert system. Coors plant happened. Excel Industries in Kansas, 3M. General Motors has had situations, Budweiser plants. I mean, all of these major companies have had this happen. And so you sit there and say, at what point are we going to say, if we have a fire alarm, if we have a tornado alarm, if we have chemical spill alarms, we probably ought to have an active shooter, hostile intruder alarm as well.
Yeah, Doug, I think it's a good place to wrap it up today. I appreciate you so very much. And we appreciate the good work you guys are doing. We invite everybody to join us every Friday at 9:30 right here on Facebook Live. We'll always talk about relevant things to keep people safe, whether it's in the school, it's in the workplace, wherever it may be.
And next week, I believe we're going to interview Chuck Green, or you're going to be interviewing Chuck Green with the Jewish Community Center. They had the unfortunate shooting at their facility, and he understands what they did. But he added the SafeDefend system due to the notification, which was the one thing that he was lacking after all the federal money came in for him.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Doug. We appreciate you. Dave, any final thoughts?
No, just a great discussion. And for everybody out there, if you want to keep your kids safe and learn how to take care of what's going on in your community, check us out every Friday at 9:30 a.m. Central Time. We are here talking all things school safety and how to keep our kids safe.
All right, guys. We appreciate you both. Go ahead, Dave.
With that, Dave, Phil, and Doug, we are out of here.